25 years.
This is going to be a very long video, isn't it?
25 years, 1997.
25 years, 1997. Yes, the world was very different in 1997. So, yeah, it's gone quick and slow, hasn't it?
Quick and slow.
Yeah.
With many, many memories of many things.
Lots of memories, lots of people. And we're going to share some of those, aren't we?
Yeah. So let's start.
One Sunday morning in December 1996, John Mumford, the senior pastor then, stood up on the platform and said, "I'm pleased to announce that Jason and Bev Clark are going to plant a church in Sutton." And I sat there and I thought, oh no. I lived in Sutton, you see. And I thought, oh no, flip me, I'm going to have to go.
So, planted out of South West London Vineyard.
South West London Vineyard. So 1997 in April, we were prayed for.
April 6th.
Commissioned.
Yep.
Off we went. And we were already living in Sutton.
And I had come from South West London Vineyard. And I think when Bev and Jason, because I obviously knew Bev and Jason, and I think when they said they were planting this church, there was just something that stirred within me. But I was so committed to SWLV, and John and Ellie Mumford were a big part of my spiritual journey. So it was like a bit of a tussle. But anyway, you know, in the end, the Lord said, you need to go. So I went.
Anyway, I followed the leading of the Lord and contacted Jason.
And we started with small groups in our house. So small groups was a very strange thing, because my memory of small groups is you have a bunch of people come around your house and you say to them, please give us all your time, energy and money to something that doesn't exist yet.
Yeah, but it will.
But it will, if you get involved.
I can remember when they used to have people over to our house. It must have been early days. I don't know if it was like when the church was like just starting, or if it was like a small group or whatever, but there were people that used to meet in our house, and I was quite little and I used to sit on the stairs and like listen in.
I went to the very first home group at Jason and Bev's. Jason had a lot more hair then.
Met for the first time with him and Bev and I think 11 other people, 10 other people in their living room in February, late February 1997. And I went along thinking, oh, this is going to be dire. I'm going to be the oldest person in the room. And Jason is the same age as my son. And I thought, oh, I'm not going to like this at all. Anyway, the first meeting was just really inspiring and exciting. I found I might have been the oldest, and I probably wasn't the oldest in the room, actually. And there was a mixed group of people there. And so it went from there. We started to meet at Jason and Bev's house as a small group once a week. And we got to know each other. We played games, played an awful lot of Jenga. You know, that brick building one where you build the towers. And I don't know whether that was Jason and Bev observing our frustrations or whatever. But anyway, we played a lot of Jenga. And we got to know each other and we prayed. And gradually, people came and joined us until, well, after very long, not very long at all, Jason and Bev were leading 2 small groups a week at their house.
And planted out the group.
So we went from 1 small group to 2 small groups to 3 small groups. We had our little kids. I was working in London.
No, I didn't have Leah by then.
You did when you started the church?
No, I was pregnant with Leah.
No.
I didn't, darling. She was born in October 97.
Oh, yeah. She was born. Oh, you were pregnant. There you go.
Yeah.
And they would like play worship songs, and I think that was probably back in the day when Dad used to play the guitar. So he'd be playing guitar, and yeah, I would hear them all chatting, and then when everyone was leaving, I'd like run back upstairs because I was supposed to be in bed.
And
Very
we
quickly
started straight away wanting to meet on Sundays. Just knew that would be helpful, and we immediately met at Holiday Inn.
Yeah. That was in about July. About after 3
No,
months.
it was before then. Straight away.
We won't argue about it.
Yeah. So we met in the Holiday Inn 1 Sunday a month.
So when I first came to Sutton Vineyard, we met in a Holiday Inn once a month.
We used to meet at the Holiday Inn. That was a strange time. I only have like little flashes of that.
We had our first ever Sunday morning service, which was, I think, in the June of 97 at the Holiday Inn Hotel. Very posh it was, up on the top floor. We had a whole suite of rooms there. And my job was to make the coffee. and serve the coffee. I think the coffee might have been ready-made, but I had to serve the coffee and the biscuits and be hospitable.
And that was fun. My memories of those days were we had people like, I have a memory of Murray and Julie. So Murray and Julie came along, visited us in the Holiday Inn, and the next Sunday, Murray was playing the bass guitar in the band and Julie was helping with setup.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things we learned about church planting, was people wanted things to continue and they knew they had to get involved for them to continue.
Jason did almost everything else. He put the chairs out, he led the worship, and for the first time we heard Jason preach at the Holiday Inn. And he spoke from what at the time he used to insist on calling Philippines. And I think he probably managed to speak for about 12 or 15 minutes.
I would go down there early on a Sunday morning and get ready to preach.
We did everything.
We did everything.
We led
Out the
worship.
chairs, lead worship, kids ministry.
Well, the kids' ministry we put in a room and we
Yeah.
watched VeggieTales and gave them chocolate.
Yep, kids loved it.
And there was maybe 5 of us in the room, and we just watched like VeggieTales on a DVD.
And people came.
My recollection of the first service that I actually came to, there were 2 things actually. First of all, I can remember Jason saying, this isn't going to be a church where we have lots of meetings. And I remember thinking, okay, we shall see what happens. That was that. It was either a dedication or a baptism service. I can't remember what it was, and I can't remember who it was. But the thing that I remember was at the end of it, the Holiday Inn, or the church, I don't know who, had put on such a lovely buffet spread. I remember thinking, well, if this is what's going to happen every week, this is my church.
And I think we did a couple of meetings at the Holiday Inn. But by then, Overton Grange School was opening, and Jason had already had a correspondence with the headmaster at Albany Range that we would start at Overton Grange on a Sunday morning.
And then very quickly we ended up at Overton Grange, and that's a God story because I thought there's this brand new high school, it's right behind where we live. School's a good place for churches, so I went to see the headmaster.
It was being built.
And the school was still being built, and met with him and sat down. Kieran Osborne was his name, I think. And he said to me, I walked in the room and he said, I know that churches often use schools, so I've already spoken to the Board of Governors. So if that's what you want to do, the school's all yours. What do you want to talk about? And I went, well, exactly that. So God made a way for us to go to Overton.
And I remember the very first thing I noticed when I walked into Overton Grange School. For those of you who've been, you know, you walk into the atrium and there's a staircase in front of you to the right. And at the top of the staircase was an enormous reproduction of the Michelangelo painting where the hand of God is reaching down for David's hand. And I remember walking in and looking at it and thinking, that's amazing. That's prophetic. That's a place where God's hand is going to reach down and touch people's lives. And I think that's turned out to be the case. The painting isn't there now.
And I had a picture of a staircase with a beam of light coming down the staircase. And we went to church Sutton that Sunday, and there stood the staircase, and this beam of light was just coming all the way down.
Yeah.
And it was just like, right, God, that's where you want us.
This is where we need to be.
Yeah.
So the adults all met in at the dance studio.
I think it was just once a month to start with. Continued meeting at Jason and Bev's in the week, and I think we were planting out other small groups by then. I don't know what the numbers were. There were a few of us. There must have been 30 or so of us by then.
Well, I joined Sutton Vineyard when it was only 6 months old, and I was told that I was the 50th member to join the church.
And I joined about a year later. Little did I know that God had something in store for me, and that was I was to meet Tana, and we've been married 18 years.
So we were meeting in the dance studio. Because there wasn't enough of us. There's only about 40 people, weren't there?
Mm-hmm.
So everybody knew everybody's name. You know, everyone just knew everyone because there weren't that many of us.
Church was much smaller. As I say, there were only 50 people. And we were still meeting in Overton Grange, but every other week. And yeah, because there were fewer people there, we got to know all the other members really well.
So when the church first started, like my dad and one other guy used to be on the shed team, and that was it. So I used to help out because that meant we could leave earlier and we didn't have to hang around for so long.
They were only doing 3 services a week, so it was 3 Sundays, and then you had the last Sunday off.
So we started on, we had 1 Sunday and then 2 Sundays and then 3, and I think into, so 1998 by Easter we were started meeting every Sunday.
Jason and Bev laughed at us because apparently in the corridor, Jason said, "So what do you think of the church?" And I said, "Oh yeah, we're just, we're seeing how it goes." After we'd been there about 6 months, hadn't we? And apparently he went home to Bev and he said, "Yeah, she doesn't like it. They're not going to stay." 24 years later.
Eventually, not very long, we were doing 4 Sundays a month, so every Sunday at Overton Grange.
And we moved from the dance studio into the middle of the hall. We took the small congregation and we sat down, and it's the first time the trustees talked to the church. And the trustees said, "Hey, there's about 50, 60 of us in church. This is our income. Here's where our income could be. Here's where our income needs to be for us to move from there to here and become the church that many of you now know." And people responded wonderfully to that. And that enabled us, in terms of giving, to move into the main hall and start meeting every Sunday.
When we went into the hall, we were facing, we face that way, we were facing that way.
To the left as you walk.
And now obviously we face this way, and we've got the dance studio and the hall, so that's changed as we've grown.
We stayed at Overton Grange, expanding across Overton Grange School as we needed to, which was a tremendous blessing to be able to do that. There were times when we were a bit pushed about car parking, but on the whole, we always have managed with the facility of Overton really, really well.
I think we've moved around the hall into like every position possible. We actually, when the church first started, I think we were positioned, like there's those old photos, and we were the front of the church, like the band and where the preacher stands were, like where they are now. But there was no stage at that point, I don't think. There were less people. There was always an OHP.
So I think when I first started coming, it was OHPs on the screen. And he was there when we got our first ever projector, which was very cool. And we were talking about all the things we can do. Like when Jason was talking, we could do funny things behind him, which I don't think we ever did, but it was always fun to have that possibility. No more looking for acetates anymore.
One of the first churches that we knew that had a website.
It was, I found the website and it just appealed to me. I loved the wording on it, so we came along 19 years ago.
I think we started our first ever podcast in 2004, which are still on the church website. Check it out.
It wasn't so different. Maybe that's just my memory, but I remember we were in the big hall. We were in rows. We were probably facing in some other direction that we are now. I think the seats were kind of in an arc rather than in nice serried straight rows. There was a band. Jason spoke most of the time. Substantially, it was Vineyard Sutton. Yeah.
I mean, it was exactly the same Vineyard values, the intimacy within worship, inviting the Holy Spirit into, every occasion that we could was amazing. But also all the work with the local community was fantastic. So all of that was just the same, really. And so I loved that, and it just felt like a family.
The one thing that I always remember, that somebody had a picture of an umbrella, and it was used as a metaphor for the church for quite a while, where they felt that God was saying that Jason had created a church that was an umbrella with many spokes, and that made space for lots of different activities and visions and ministries, and so I felt like the disability ministry, that was one thing. Then there was Wendy's sort of prayer and a lot of the inner healing stuff, and then there was the sort of children, the lighthouse equivalent, the Wendy House. That sort of, there was a community, the food bank, the furniture project, all that. It was like there was room for all these different ministries to be part of the church with this umbrella. And I do remember it felt like that, yeah.
We were putting together a children's work by then, and people were coming. I mean, amazingly, people came every week. Every week people came, and people came back, and we were growing. And before we knew where we were 100 people. And always we attracted children or people who were producing children. And I'd love to know, I don't suppose there's a statistic anyway, but I'd love to know how many children, how many babies have been born at Sutton Vineyard in the last 25 years. It would be a very large number.
And then we were just in one of the classrooms opposite the hall, and again there was like 5 of us with veggie tails in the corner.
But yeah, when the first Sunday that we turned up, we took our 5 children and doubled the size of the children's work.
Yeah, there were 5 kids in the one.
And we took our 5.
Yeah.
And so then Karen Mitchell, bless her, came up to us and said, seeing as you've doubled our group, do you want to join the team?
Then we moved down to the other corridor where we have mini kids now. And then there was like more kids arrived from places. And we had like proper kids work. But again, there was like 2 adults and about half a dozen kids.
So we were always under some pressure to provide good children's facilities, good children's work, always wanting it to be an investment in the children, not just a babysitting service.
We both got involved with kids, but Faith ended up leading kids for a short while.
I used to lead kids. Where it was called, we used to have like jelly beans, jelly tots, Skittles, Smarties. That was in the days when I wasn't paid for doing it. But no, yeah, loved Vineyard Kids. Probably not my natural gifting, but yeah, I ran it for a number of years, didn't I?
That was when they were all named after sweets, which I know continued for quite a while, because that was like a big thing for a long time.
All the groups were kind of called a certain type of sweets. Mine was licorice all sorts. Although I think I moved to jelly beans at some point.
It was called CD-ROMs, Gobstoppers, right at the very end when there were huge classes and not enough leavers, and somehow we scraped through the 2 hours of the Sunday. So, yeah.
And then they were called DVDs.
Yeah, that's right, DVDs and then CD-ROMs. They were Gobstoppers at first, all named after sweets.
So Vineyard Kids, when I took over, we had the age groups. So, and they basically just stayed in their age groups.
We used to get given little packets of sweets. For some reason, I can remember curly whirlies as well. I think they were like a big thing back then.
But I guess it was, we used to have worship. So we had people who would come down. Do you remember at one point we had a worship band for kids? So they would come in and just do worship. Sometimes we would all be together, the different age groups. So we would have most of the younger ones together, and then the slightly older ones would be in worship on their own, wouldn't they? So we had an actual worship band as well. And it wasn't necessarily the people who were on the main worship in church. So, so that
mixed
was
it up,
fun.
didn't it? Because sometimes the person that was actually leading worship in main church, they would actually come down and do a bit and then go back into the main service. It kind of mixed around, didn't it?
There's not a lot I can remember about kids other than like the worship time. Like that was something that always really stuck out to me. Like when those first the Great Big God CDs came out, I think we must have been like 10 at that point. And when those came out and like whacking them on the CD player and like dancing to them and knowing all the actions and like teaching the younger kids, that's like probably my strongest memory.
When I joined, we had lanyards for kids, and you always in the groups with the little ones, especially with the really little ones, because you bend down to them and then the lanyard kind of just flicks in their face. It's like great. So I chucked it over my shoulder, and then nobody could actually read it. And the number of lanyards I've taken home in my whole kind of 16 years, from Lighthouse, from kids, from I don't know what else had lanyards at the time, but.
This is I love this story. We felt that we needed a children's pastor. I accidentally ended up at a children's leadership conference. I didn't realise it was for children. It's a long story, but that's the short version. And God spoke to us really clearly, but we felt that we had so many kids in our church that what we needed was a kids pastor.
So in 2016, Josh and I had been married for about a year, and I moved my job to Sutton, and we cancelled on a house purchase over in Kent because we felt like God had told us to go home. This was during a period of illness for me. I was off work for about 2 weeks, and in those 2 weeks, we kind of changed our entire lives and came to Sutton.
It was a particularly challenging time financially for the church, and we didn't have the money for it. And the trustees sort of basically, they didn't say this, but what I heard was, well, knock yourself out. So we went to the church, we cast some vision, and this is amazing. We had someone in our church who had been saving up money for a very long period of time, and God had told them it was to release children's ministry one day. And they just joined our church and they heard the vision. And then they contacted one of our leadership team and made a gift that was big enough to pay for the first year full time of a children's pastor, so we could advertise.
So on our very first time at Sutton Vineyard, we walked in, and in the welcome, Bev and Jason explained that they were recruiting for a children and families pastor, and something in me just knew that that was going to be my job.
And then Hannah became our kids pastor.
So when I started in February 2017 as kids pastor, Jason and Bev had already gone ahead and asked the congregation and mainly parents to fill my inbox with encouraging, kind of welcoming messages. And I still look back on those today. I still have them. I can now put names to faces. And I just felt really welcomed. People invited us over for lunch, and I kind of just got stuck in.
Yeah, there's been quite a big change, I suppose, in kids. And I think there's been a lovely emphasis on worship, and seeing the kids praying for each other and praying for us as, you know, the helpers. And it's so precious when you see children doing that. And one of the kind of pivotal times was 2 weeks after I started in the office. I managed to get a cancellation place on a kids retreat, which I've been to since a couple of times. And there I entered into the world of kids ministry, loads of other kids pastors, and God just started showing me what to do in our kids ministry. I went without any ideas, any knowledge, any real qualification in kids ministry. I just went with kind of an open heart and a real kind of need for the Lord to show me how to do what he wanted us to do. So I went to that conference or that retreat, learned from the best. And when I came back, I started 6 months of completely reimagining our kids ministry. And we relaunched our kids ministry into Big and Mini Kids in September 2017.
Within the first year of being in church, I joined kids, but I used to do it in our previous church that we were in. And I'm sure I must have mentioned it to someone that I used to be on kids. It's like, right, come on then, join the kids team. Everyone, you stay, you play, you know, you serve if you want to be a part of this church, which is great. And I've pretty much been on it constantly since we joined. A couple of breaks when we've had the young kids, but I love it. It's great. I'm a big kid at heart, I think. So I like messing about, I like the games, I like the teaching as well. And actually sometimes the preparing to teach the kids, because I'm not a teacher, so I have to think about it. Obviously teachers have to think about teaching, but you know, I'm not a professional teacher, so I've got to prep, and often God will be teaching me in the prep I'm doing for the kids. And then kids themselves have a great way of just cutting through the rubbish of the world. They're not cynical, you know, they're just, everything is really simple for kids.
So the kids ministry that I kind of inherited from some incredible leaders that have gone before was kind of group-based, and I listened to the kids and I listened to the leaders and the parents. I polled everyone and asked them sort of what they wanted from church, and I realised that what we needed to do was create a space where kids wanted to have fun. So instead of having individual age groups, we had what we call a rotational ministry. The kids had zones that they visited. Leaders were empowered in the giftings that the Lord had given them. So some leaders
kind of went round, as we call them, champions with the kids and built relationship. And then some leaders ran specific zones. So kind of like an adventure zone for games, and then we had construction zone for building and craft. And it just created a space whereby kids wanted to come every week. They wanted to bring their friends, and we all just had so much fun.
Hannah went on maternity leave and we needed someone for maternity leave cover, and Lily stepped up a few years back, and Lily became our kids coordinator. And then ultimately, Lily has gone from that to become our children's pastor.
So I have been working for Sutton Vineyard for 3 years now. I know, it's gone quickly, hasn't it? I was a teacher and loved lots of bits of teaching, didn't love other bits of teaching, then went on maternity leave with my eldest. And just as I was due to come back off maternity leave, Hannah, who was Children and Families pastor at the time, was about to go on maternity leave. So this kind of gap opened up for somebody to keep kids running while she was off. And I kind of went, yeah, okay. And had a handover with Hannah that was 2 days. It was supposed to be a month. But lovely Benji came early, so I was kind of thrown in the deep end and managed to keep things going until lockdown, and then everything was obviously very different then. And then after the maternity contract ended, managed to stay on as a permanent member of staff. And then when Hannah became assistant pastor, I became the Children and Families pastor. And it's just been so exciting to step into all of these opportunities that God's just putting in front of me. And I love it. I love it. I was sitting at work today and I looked around and I literally said, I just love it here. It's definitely what God has for me in this part of my life, and it's
I think the whole emphasis, it always has been, but I think as we've journeyed with it, the whole focus is to just introduce these children to Jesus, whichever way we can, so that actually as they grow and as they grow up, that, you know, they take Jesus with them, because it's been such fun and because it's been so for them and focused on them. And I think that's probably what I've observed anyway.
They want to come to church because their mates there and they know they're going to have fun. Whereas when I was growing up, it was, I don't want to go to church, it's boring. I have to sit on a cold, hard pew and listen to old style music. There isn't anything for me there, whereas our boys ask about going to church, don't they?
Yeah, and I think similarly, I stopped going to church when I was 10 because I was like, there's just nothing to hold my attention, but I don't think there's any chance of that happening here because, you know, it's fun for them, which is, it's lovely.
Yeah.
So yeah, so we had lots of kids. We didn't have very many youth at that point, and then we had a church weekend away, didn't we?
Yeah.
So yeah, which I don't know where it was, somewhere on the south coast. And then all of a sudden, all these youth turned up.
But I remember at Herne Bay, which was the first church holiday, Jason was looking, and at the back of the church there was all these youngsters sitting there, and he suddenly thought, oh, I think we have a youth group. So, yeah.
Remember, whoever did the administration for the weekend said, it looks like we've got a youth group. So we went away on this church weekend, and of course when you're a church planter you do everything. So guess who became the youth leaders? We did.
Jason and Bev used to lead youth because at the time when the church was really small there was no one else to do it.
I ran youth Sunday nights. I remember having lots of great water fights in our garden.
I joined the church when I was 17, so I was in the youth group, and it wasn't a huge youth group, but there was maybe like 10 of us perhaps, but so it meant we got to know each other really well, and we had a lot of fun. It was at Jason and Bev's house. They ran the youth group, and we did lots of really fun things. Like I remember a water fight that we had one evening, a Sunday evening, outside the back of their house.
But they remember the movies that we watched and the water fights
and
that we had and the forts that we made.
And so part of youth, we had some movie nights, which were really fun. And obviously it was at Jason and Bev's house. And one evening, Jason loved Blockbuster Video because it was the biggest thing ever. And he decided that we were going to watch American Pie. And so he was like, okay, next week I'm going to rent American Pie and we're going to watch it together. And it's going to be really fun. So we had popcorn and everything. And as we were watching it, we all know what American Pie is like.
And I think they watched with horror as they saw sort of the content of what's in the film.
And there were some really cringy moments to watch with your youth pastors. And then as we watched the whole thing, and at the end there was this sort of classic awkward silence. And so Jason sort of says, okay, so next week we're going to have a discussion all about sex and relationships. And we did. And it was really good and really positive and really helpful. But yeah, some very funny times and formative times that I remember in the youth.
That was 20 years ago, 25. And I still remember it. I wasn't even there and I still remember it. So that's funny.
So then youth was me at 11 or 12 or maybe 13. And then it kind of went up to like people in their early 20s and mid 20s. And there was just like a great big load of us and one youth leader. Met in someone's house. They had a really big house. So we all used to go into the service in the mornings and then go and hang out at theirs in the evening.
Youth has moved around a lot actually. Of all the things I've involved in, that's been the area that's changed the most.
So yeah, it's changed massively. So we started off with just a group of people who thought of themselves as youngish to a kind of formal youth group. And then there were two youth groups because there was too many kids to have just one great huge group of them. So we split it into an older one and a younger one. And now we've got like full-time staff that run a youth group.
First came to church when I was 15. Yes, I googled churches in Sutton. The best website of all of the churches that I looked at was Sutton Vineyard's website. I emailed the contact details and Jason put me in touch with Ashley Smith, who was running the youth at the time. And then I just rocked up one Sunday morning, which happened to be the Holy Spirit week on their Youth Alpha course. So bear in mind, I was somebody who had not been to church before, did not know any of anything. I was prayed for that day, had this amazing experience with the Holy Spirit, and I've been here ever since.
So when I first joined, the main event was on a Sunday evening. I think there was something on a Sunday morning, but I was mostly involved with the Sunday evenings.
We would meet at the old church centre, so not the first one, it must have been the second church centre on Robin Hood Lane, and we'd have all those brilliant meetings like every Sunday evening, and I was always so excited to like hang out with my friends from youth, and we'd always pray and worship.
So I was in Ignite and we had sessions in one of the upstairs classrooms at Overton in the mornings, and then we all came down for worship at the end, and then our evening sessions were at the old church centre. We always had excellent snacks. And I just remember laughing lots and doing lots of ridiculous things, but then having the most amazing worship sessions, like in that tiny space with a handful of teenagers, and we were just like loving Jesus. It was great.
So I think I started serving on youth about 10 years ago with the Norwoods when they were leading it, and since then it's just been a wonderful time of getting to know our youth, seeing how they grow with the Lord and growing myself as well. So I always want to remain as youthful as possible, and I figure the best way to do that is just to be in youth. So if you're not in youth and you want to remain youthful, get in youth.
There's a lot of social stuff that's always been going on with youth. Rob Brushfield Hodges used to do Robopoly, I think it was called.
The best thing we ever did was that Monopoly fun day that Rob Brushfield Hodges organised for us.
Where we all went to London and did some kind of treasure hunt type thing.
As if it was like actual like Monopoly, like the places were like on the Monopoly board.
I was in Fusion, and what we used to do was we would have like, again, our main sessions in the morning, but then things were opened up to us, like things like youth band and things like that we did on a Friday night. We had girls' night in and lads' lounge that took place. I loved them. They were really fun. And yeah, it was doing all those extra things outside of church on a Sunday morning that made me feel like Sutton Vineyard was my home. It was more than just kind of a youth group or a club that I was coming to. It was actually something that was making me feel like it would matter if I wasn't here, and that's something really special.
We've done trips to DTI and Soul Survivor, which are always incredible things to do. Soul Survivor ended a couple of years ago, or just before COVID, so DTI, we just went there this summer, which was again an amazing thing where thousands of youth come along and meet with the Lord, which is wonderful.
It was a really weird thing. I didn't have like this big experience of the Holy Spirit as soon as I stepped through the door, but there was something that made me go back every week. And then it got to DTI about a year into me joining, and I gave my life to Jesus for the first time. And it was only at that point that I realised God had been working in me the whole year previous at Sutton Vineyard.
So we advertised for a youth pastor. We got a lot of applicants,
but
Ben stood out head and
shoulders
with his experience.
Mr. Ben Webb.
And actually Ben and then his wonderful wife Sarah, there was a period of time they stepped up and were overseeing the youth for a few months before Ben was given the job as youth pastor.
I was in the youth group all the way up to the age of 18. And when, it must have been when I was about 16 or so, Ben, who was the youth pastor at the time, said to me, "You're going to make a great youth worker one day." And I laughed at him. I actually laughed. I said, "No, I'm going to be a West End actress. Like, not what I'm doing." Absolutely no. But God had other plans, and it turns out that was actually quite a prophetic word. I was about to say, go Ben, go Holy Spirit through Ben.
Yeah. They both get a woo.
So it was quite a long journey, and I originally went to uni to study theatre and performance, but I was steered off course from that. So when I became quite poorly, I had to drop out of university, and I ended up doing some voluntary work with Ben just to kind of do something, get me out the house. And I started volunteering just one day a week, and slowly I was given kind of a bit more responsibility until I was allowed to do things like I helped organise the Wipeout event at DTI, which is like a huge obstacle course thing, which was really fun.
Yeah, it was really fun.
And then it got to the end of my treatment, and suddenly there was this thing of, well, what is God actually calling me to do? And then I just happened to have a conversation with Livy, who went to St. Mellitus College and studied theology and youth ministry. And she told me all about it, and I just went, there's something inside me that's making me want to do that. So I chatted to Ben about it and talked about, like, if I applied for this place, could I have a placement at Sutton Vineyard? So I am doing my placement with them. And it's been a crazy journey with Ben leaving for Ireland.
And then Ben was on staff for nearly 7 years. And then more recently, Hannah Radin joined us. Hannah and Marco. Hannah has been with us, will it be a year in November. And Hannah, from Essex, living in Ireland, out of all the applicants we got, was a standout. She's been amazing. And always a challenge to step in the shoes of another pastor who's left and loved. But Hannah has done fantastically well.
Well, the first church office was in our house, and then Eileen became our first administrator, and she used to go between her office and her house and our house. There was no email, or it was just starting. Everything was faxed, wasn't it? No mobile phones.
We had faxes. No, we had mobile phones. I had a mobile phone.
But Eileen didn't.
No,
so everything was backwards and forwards between our houses.
Yeah.
So then we thought, as the church grew, we should probably get a proper office, didn't we? somewhere to put everything and run everything out of. And that's when we found Greenford Road.
And that must have been maybe
2000?
Do you think 20 years ago? 15 years ago?
2001?
We did a lot out of the school
2001,
and our house for a long period of time, but we've only had 2 bookkeepers in the last 25 years. Murray Wilson was one of them.
They're very good at their jobs.
And then we have Meryl Skinner, who has been
11 years.
Is it 11 years?
Yeah.
Meryl? And I tell you what, having a bookkeeper, making sure everything's in place and in
legal.
order, that accountants, when they do your audits, love and like. And if it wasn't for Meryl, our church wouldn't be running.
Or
because
Murray.
she is so wonderful. And Murray, if you're watching
So
this,
blessed
thank you.
with those. And then as church group, we thought we probably needed some help pastoring.
Yes.
So
we did.
We put out our feelers, didn't we? Well, we had assistant pastor, Jonathan Green, who was fab, John and Felicity.
John and Felicity. They were with us a long time ago when we were in Robin Hood Lane as assistant pastors. And
Couple of
then
years.
they left to go off to Methodist Central Hall as a youth pastor. And then John and Joy were our biggest pastoral appointment. They came on staff as assistant and then associate pastors.
Moved from Oxford.
We knew them in the early
girls.
days of the church with all their girls. And they were
Such a blessing.
staff in the church for 10 years.
Who is John?
Who's been on staff
He
now
actually leads the church.
for over 10 years. Yeah, he does. Yeah, John and Claire joined the church. It was such a blessing to us. And
Have you got a minute, John?
There is a joke. John says, "Can I have a minute?" And we know a minute means about an hour in John's time. But we love
Anyway,
him
John
dearly.
and Claire.
Anyway, John
Love
and Claire
them
joined
dearly.
the church, and we had in the restructuring going on several years ago. There was an opportunity. We realised we needed something like an operations manager. Didn't have the funding for it, and again, that was a gift. So we had John turn up, and we thought, well, we think John would be amazing at this. And
John was outstanding.
yes, John stood out, as we hoped he would. And again, a wonderful thing of God's provision. We had a member of the church who'd actually funded John's role. Now, John and Claire took an enormous risk, like people do when they come on staff, and it's like, we think we've got some money. If your role doesn't help the church grow, you won't have a role. That's a big thing for people to do, and we want to honour that. And so John came on staff, and behind the scenes, John does so much day to day that you will never see. And if you were to sit in a trustees meeting or in my meetings with John and see the things that have to happen behind the scenes for a church to be safe and legal and pay its bills and policies and procedures and everything connect together, there are probably thousands of inputs that you couldn't imagine, and John makes all those happen. So the first official mission trip I remember was a Bolivia mission that we had, didn't we?
No, I remember there was one to Bolivia that I really wanted to go on because I was learning Spanish at school, and I was like, I can speak over there. And my mum was like, you're 13, you can't go on a mission trip to Bolivia.
I think I was in the Bolivia, well, I know I was on the Bolivian mission trip in 2002, where Lorraine and I travelled around South America for 2.5 months. And whilst we were there, we met up with a lot of people from Sutton Vineyard at the time. And we worked in an orphanage there, which is still we still talk about it to this day.
And then with John and Joy on staff, we developed a relationship with Pastor Sana in Sri Lanka. And that was after the Asian tsunami. On the Boxing Day, and we felt as a church that we would not just pray but find a way to invest, and we did. We had a place that we gave money to as a project, and then we had a team that went out. John and Joy went out for several years in a row, and a youth trip.
We did quite a few mission trips there. I was on 4 of those. I think we did 6 in total. There was a youth one.
I went on, I think, the 2nd or 3rd trip. I went out there and then suggested to the youth leaders at the time that we take the youth out there.
So we'd gone out to Sri Lanka, a team of us in the youth group, because there'd previously been like an adult team out there, and they had a relationship with the church out in Colombo.
I think going to Sri Lanka was a really eye-opening experience for me. I'd only been at the church for a year and a bit, maybe, so I was still kind of a baby Christian, and it is unlike any experience I've ever had.
And I think it's a great thing for them to go and do something like this without their parents, push themselves, go somewhere really different where you have to adapt to something that's local. You're not in a hotel.
And there were things that I loved about that trip, like really being thrown in the deep end. Like we led worship at the Sri Lankan church, and we did like that kids camp. with the kids, which was really fun. And we were thrown into like prayer meetings.
And we did the sports day with the kids. Really special was going into other people's homes, kind of being in a small group setting in a completely different culture. It was unlike anything we've ever experienced. I think all of us, it was a youth trip. We were all so out of our comfort zone. But it was just so wonderful to see God working in completely different environments, places that are nothing like what we're used to. And just some memories that it was like it was yesterday, you know, because it was so impactful.
So on all the mission trips, it's been very much about building community and not just working with the churches, but with the people surrounding it as well. So trying to get to know people and build a relationship with them. And some of the stories have been amazing. I remember in Sri Lanka just praying for a lady for her to be healed for, I think she had trouble with her legs or something. And then the next Sunday, she came up to me. This was at her house or at it became a prayer-a-thon where we were just praying for these people were just coming in through the door constantly. It was bizarre. And myself and a chap called John Pachensky, we were just praying for people as they were coming in. And this lady came up to me on the Sunday after and she's like, I've been healed. I can't remember what it was, her leg or whatever. And I didn't know what to say. I was a bit like, oh wow, prayer works. That's cool. And then after that, so we did that for probably best part of a decade, I think 12 years or so, which was a really special time.
And then it felt like God changed things for us as a focus. John and Joy moving away on the missions, and the lovely Denzel and Leanne, Denzel, members of our church.
Yeah.
And Denzel told me that they were moving back to South Africa, and I ended up going out with him for a cup of coffee or breakfast or something. And I remember listening to him about what he was going to do and thinking, oh my goodness, we need to support this. And Denzel and Leanne started up Aslan Hope in Sport.
That as a church, we've continued to support in their work, reaching out to disadvantaged communities around Cape Town and further out, and working to bring hope and the gospel and hundreds of Bibles actually out to young people and children in those disadvantaged areas. So it's been a real privilege to serve as a trustee of Aslan Hope in Sport and to just see the involvement of Sutton Vineyard sending mission teams out to Cape Town, which has been a great experience for quite a lot of people.
Yeah, so we did loads of different things like auction of promises. That was fantastic that evening when we hired a church hall and had, there must have been about 100 people there. Loads of the church gifted, really generously gifted stuff, either through their work or skills they had. And I think that evening we raised a ridiculous amount of money, like $8,000 or something, is the figure that I've got in my head. It may even have been more. And we were going with the aim of blessing Aslan with, I can't remember the exact figure, maybe $5,000 was our aim to take, a big charity check, really classic, to give to Denzel and Leanne. And in the end, I can remember Jamie, who led the trip, started writing the figure on this big check. There'll be a video of it somewhere, and started writing it. And he wrote 15,000, and Denzel was just like, "What?" Like it was a joke. No, we raised 15,000. It was absolutely amazing.
And in South Africa, it was very similar, meeting community, working a lot with people that Denzel and Leanne are connected with. So working to try and just help the communities where they are. So we were trying to help, so one of the schools that he works with where they're doing sport, we tried to clean up a playground that was near them.
I love sport, and the opportunity to go and serve in South Africa. We'd been to South Africa before. It's a beautiful country, but obviously has its challenges, and just the opportunity to go out there and work with Aslan. Yeah, it was amazing, fantastic time. Denzel and Leanne are doing amazing stuff out there.
It's incredible just to see what always strikes me is no matter where you go in the world, God is there. And just because we worship the God here in Sutton, it's the same God out there. And sometimes you have to travel far away to sort of realise that, even though it's obvious when you think about it. So after we came back from Sri Lanka the first time, I was a bit like, why can't we, if we're doing projects out abroad, why can't we do them locally? So we created this thing called CIA, Community in Action, which after a couple of years we decided wasn't the greatest name because it had bad connotations, so it became
Community Action Projects, which we did through small groups
CAPs.
for several years. And small groups would take on projects.
And that was basically going to different people's houses and helping them just do jobs, whatever they needed doing.
We've run 1 or 2
1 or 2
as a small group, which has been good.
It was good to get the small group behind you on a project like that, because then you got some support. It wasn't just a one day, everyone in and then everyone out, and you're left to finish things on your own. So that was it was a good experience.
The famous one was June's Garden.
One time we did a lady's garden who'd been very ill. She had several kids, 3, 4 kids, and just wasn't physically well enough to do her garden. It was completely overgrown. I think she was in a council house.
I think we went back like 4 or 5 times over the course of a month or 2.
We pitched up with 5 or 7 people, something of that sort of ilk, a few weeks in a row at the weekend. And the ones I did were literally just clearing the weeds out and all the nettles and all sorts. So we were geared up, head to toe. Don't show your skin anywhere. Boiling hot, gloves, and just ripping out nettles all over the place.
I remember jumping up and down on a skip, trying to get it to be squashed down so that it could fit even more stuff in.
But anyway, June's Garden, we made it beautiful by the end of it. It's great.
That was really nice to see the transition and get to know the kids throughout the day.
And then right back in the early days, because Vineyard's very into compassion, we were like, what can we do in the community?
We took over the Sutton Furniture project, which was something that met in Sutton, and it was similar to what we do in the Lighthouse now, but it was regard to furniture.
The Vine project was taking furniture from people who didn't want it and giving it to people who needed it, basically. So it started off like 2 of the women from the church heard about it, I think, or heard that there was a project that did it that was shutting down. So we decided to take it over as a church.
We took it on and we went to the church and said, hey, we think God's calling us to get involved in this. And we had dozens and dozens of volunteers. Apparently at a council meeting where some people were complaining about a church taking on a project, another councillor stood up and said, well, basically, if the church who's willing to take this on, pay for it and staff it, if they don't do it, it's going to die. So what else would you rather have happen?
It was fantastic. So people would donate furniture, and then a group of people would go around and deliver it to people that needed it.
And I used to go and help out during my school holidays. I'd go sit on the van and try and lift really heavy furniture.
We learnt as we went along, because one of the issues that I think we had on the first day was never take anything that is too big, because invariably we were taking things from Victorian size wardrobes, and these were going into properties which were much smaller, and in some cases we actually had to dismantle the wardrobes in order to get it through the front door.
Carrying sofas up 3 flights
Pivot.
or 4 flights of stairs.
And we used to be out on 2 vans doing kind of 3 runs every day.
My first day in our van was delivering furniture. Because of this, it was taking too long. We decided that we needed a lunch break. So we decided to stop at McDonald's on the A217. The issue was that we hadn't realised that the van was too high for the barrier. And as we were going for the drive-through, the barrier came dislodged and ended up on top of the van. So we had to try and get somebody from inside the restaurant to come out with a very tall ladder and clamp the barrier back on or hold it while we reversed the van out.
I do remember buying some fiberglass and some fillet and being on top of the van trying to repatch a hole because one of the drivers had gone underneath something that was too low.
And then that became the Vine project, and got charity National Lottery funding, so they were able to get a big warehouse over in Merton, which was really exciting at the time.
Purchased 2 vans, we had full-time volunteers, and so it snowballed from there.
When they got their own like big place, the youth group went over and painted all of it because it was just a warehouse that had not seen any TLC for a really long time. So we went and painted all of it for like 2 evenings, I think we did. And then when I left college, I worked there full time for a year, which was great. So it went from being run by a few volunteers on a Saturday to running full time with like 100 volunteers.
We've done things like Christmas wrapping.
Oh yes, favourite thing, Christmas wrapping.
Where we would wrap up people's presents for free.
We used to do that in the St Nicholas Centre mostly. It's surprising how such a tiny small thing can have such an impact, because the number of people who couldn't cope with the fact that they didn't have to pay for this. I've had several conversations each year with people saying, but you need to take some money for this. I'm like, no, I'm not going to take some money for this, because this is about giving you a small blessing. It's a gift. A gift is something you receive without giving back. It's the point.
We have had and still have the Wendy House. It was called the Wendy House because we always seem to have lots of Wendy's in our church. And back in the day, the Wendy House started, and that's a mother and toddler group, and that still makes wonderful.
It was an instant hit in the community.
I still to this day think the Wendy House is called the Wendy House because it was started by about 3 different Wendy's. I'm sure that's why it was called that.
When I started my job, I had about a 6-month period to get kids ministry relaunched, and then I turned to some of our community ministries, and I had the privilege of walking alongside our Wendy House leaders, seeing what they do in the community. At that point we were running 2 sessions a week on a Monday and a Tuesday, and the Wendy House has been going for 22 years maybe, right from the start of when Jason and Bev planted our church, and its legacy just goes to show how vital toddler groups are in our community, and toddler groups that do things well, that look after people, that have leaders who love to see new things brought in for the kids to use.
So I was involved with the Wendy House from 2011 when my son was born. So I was 39 weeks pregnant when I joined the Wendy House team with our first child. And then I did it for about 9 years, something like that. So it finished just before COVID. So at the beginning, I ran it with a wonderful team. I didn't run it at the beginning, actually. It was run by other people, run by Sonia and people before me.
And we just fell in love with it. Like, it's unlike any other toddler group that I've been to.
Do you know what, it was so good and positive, and it was a great way to start the week on a Monday. And I would say that to new members of the team when they joined. Like, if people had a baby, I would encourage them to come to the Wendy House, and it was like a little Wendy House family, actually.
I love Wendy House. I first went to Wendy House when Eden, my eldest, was a teeny tiny baby. I think she was like 3 weeks old or something. And I was really struggling, and I had a baby that screamed on me all the time, and I was just welcomed into this space where I could just sit and somebody brought me a cup of tea, I could feed my baby, and then somebody took her away and gave her a cuddle, and I could just be myself for a minute.
And for me, that was a really important part of those formative years for our children, certainly our 2 boys.
And it's just always been such a lovely community of other parents and carers, and a really safe space just to breathe and let your kids play. So I was involved in that, ended up helping on the team until Eden was about a year old. And then my mum carried on taking her after that.
And in the season of COVID, we did Wendy House Live. So Dave and I were talking about how we could sort of reach out and sort of connect with people. And we did Wendy House Live for, I don't know, Jack would probably tell you, because Jack did it towards the end as well.
And we so missed being together in person, but it was quite funny watching Jack and Eden in our parents' front room as Eden was having a bit of a meltdown. and Jack was trying to sing Row, Row, Row Your Boat and get her to make a craft or something. She was she was nearly 2, was it?
She was nearly 2.
And very opinionated.
Oh yeah. Sometimes she loved the craft so much she didn't want to stop doing the craft. So we were just like, okay, you stay there. And Jack was just singing a song by himself with Eden gluing lollipop sticks to a piece of paper in the background.
We did it on a Monday morning. We did like a bit of singing and a story, and my daughter would be standing there behind me, like on the sofa and like walking around behind me, and then we'd have the musical instruments and we'd do the same songs so that the kids would recognise them. And it was a really good way to connect with people still through COVID. So I'm glad we did it.
After lockdown, we needed to make a decision what was going to happen with Wendy House. The team that had previously been leading it really felt like it was time for them to step down. And me and Hannah Miles went, oh, we really can't let Wendy House stop being a thing.
And I now have the absolute privilege as a volunteer on my day off to lead our Wendy House ministry as a mum with Lily, kind of taking on the baton from before COVID. And we could only do this from the legacy that has been left by parent and grown up and granny and kind of auntie and just church member who've gone before us in kind of running our Wendy House toddler group.
The people that we've got to know, it's become like a little family. And the fact that we can provide that space that was provided for me when I first had Eden is just so special, because, I mean, parents need their village around them. Yeah. And there is just, something lovely about that space when you walk in. It's mad and the kids are all playing, but we all just look out for each other's kids, have a chat, have a catch up. And we wouldn't trade it for anything. We love it.
Why don't we talk about premises
and
places?
All the different places we've been.
We've had quite a few offices. We've had, the first one I think was in Croydon. I think we borrowed space off Croydon Vineyard or whatever, or might have been Purley Vineyard. And then we got an office in Sutton, just on the one-way system. Then we moved from there to Robin Hood Lane. And then we moved to where we are now at Staten Road. So we've had quite a few different bases, but each time it's got better and better. It's very exciting when we get a new place.
So we got a place over on
by Robin Hood
Pub.
Yep.
The downstairs of what had been an old warehouse where they used to
play cricket,
test cricket bats out. And an accountancy firm had bought it and renovated it. They were upstairs and they were renting out a unit downstairs. So
that was a great place.
It was, and we fitted it out. It's like just a big lounge with some offices around it. And it was
we were there for 10 years.
And then eventually, after 10 years, we outgrew that place and we moved to where we are now, that we've been in for 9 years.
Yeah, Staten Road.
Staten Road. Well, so we've got Staten Road, we've got the Dolphin Pubs. Every place that we moved into, church members stepped up and gave to make that happen for the church as it was then, but for the church that would grow. So we get to tell these stories of people who made all of that happen to get to where we are today.
It's been a real test of our faith sometimes, in particular, saying yes to stuff as a trustee team that we knew we didn't have the money for unless God provided it, or sort of stepping out in faith. So this place, for example, when it was just bricks, we were like, oh, God feels like he's saying yes, but sensible budget probably doesn't say yes. It's been really interesting to see that kind of dynamic play out.
And I think one of the big things for me that I'll always remember is this place and how we came to that.
Yeah, so I painted this ceiling and all these walls and the walls in the prayer room too. And then someone came in and put really nice stuff on them to make them look better than they were.
So one of the things I have been very involved with over the life of the church is the prayer side of church. And we've done lots of different things over the years to promote prayer, to learn about prayer. And I can remember a time about 6 years ago when I was in conversation with Jason one day. We were talking about prayer and I happened to make the statement, I think we ought to go to a prayer conference somewhere. So his response was, well, okay, you find one and we'll go. So I found one. And it was rather nice because it was the 24/7 prayer conference, which happened to be in Geneva that year. So 4 of us went across to Geneva for the 24/7 prayer conference, and it was a pivotal moment in the life of SVC. Because I think it was a great time for all of us that were there, but Jason particularly really heard from the Lord about the need to provide a prayer space for the church and even for the town, for other churches. And he came home from that with a burden to pray and to seek the space that God was going to give to us. So I thought, that's interesting. Every so often I'd ask him, how are you getting on with the praying? And he said, yeah, I've been driving around the town and I've seen these various buildings, and here's this derelict pub on the high street. I pass it every morning as I come down to the office, on the right there. He said, it's all boarded up. He said, looks pretty ramshackle. But he said, I just get this feeling every time I pass it. He said, I just wish I knew who owned it. So I looked at him and said, well, I know who owns it. And through a very roundabout chain of circumstances, I did. And so we were able to contact the owner and come to the Dolphin, as it was then, filthy, dirty, dark, dusty. Some very interesting conversations with the owner about whether he would just let us come and pray here. And it was just a very exciting time of knowing that God was about to do something and was in fact doing something, and we were part of it. And we started to come into the Dolphin room where we are now. It was filthy dirty, it was dark, the windows were all boarded up, there was no electricity, no heat. It was January and freezing cold. There was rubbish everywhere, there was thick dust everywhere. It was absolutely awful. And when we first came down here, we knew by then that it had been closed, it had lost its license as a pub, because it was effectively pretty well the worst pub in the area. And there were all sorts of dreadful things going on here. So we knew that it had a bad reputation. So we walked in from the back door, and I sort of expected to walk in and go, don't like it here. But we walked in and sort of went, oh, okay. And there was just something already in the middle of all this dirt and dust and darkness. There was just something of the presence of God here. So we called the church in and we started to have meetings here. We had some really exciting times here. In the dark, bring your own chair because there's nothing to sit on. Wrap yourself up because it's freezing cold. We had some really exciting prayer times here. And the rest is history. The Lord had gone before us, and he had obviously prepared the owner's heart for just making a very generous and enthusiastic response to us when we started to talk about hiring it, renting it. Agreement was reached comparatively easily. And then the church was mobilised and everybody stepped up brilliantly, and finance was forthcoming, and workmen were forthcoming, and skills were forthcoming. And we did this amazing transformation in this place. And it's been a huge blessing ever since to the community and to the church, and will always stand out in my memory as one of those incredible things that when God sets his mind to do something, and we just listen and follow, then the results can be absolutely amazing.
Still, we get local councillors, we've got lots of community users here, and they'll often wonder at how wonderful it is and how a church did this. And then they always ask, when I get to talk to them, who paid for this? Because they're used to either government paying for things or grants. And when you say that church members gave their money to make this happen, it just, it's fascinating being able to say that, yeah, people did that in response to prayer and because of their faith.
In the community.
Yeah, I think the impact that our church has had on the community, particularly with the Dolphin, I mean, that's been really exciting watching that unfold. You know, one minute Jason was talking about this guy that he'd spoken to that had a pub and wasn't sure what he was going to do with it, and the next thing is, my goodness, we've got this place, and you know, we're serving the community from here.
This space now, the Dolphin, you know, it was hard work, and at some point you were kind of like, why are we doing it? But when you see how much it's blessed through Lighthouse, but also through some of the other organisations that now have access to this space, and there's something, when you walk in, there's like peace, almost a sense of peace that you don't get in other spaces. So that's been a highlight.
We now have our Lighthouse project, which is part of the Grow Baby network. It's one of the many things in here, but it's a main thing in the life of the church. And what does Lighthouse do?
Gives away really good quality clothing and goods and baby stuff to anyone who wants it, 0 to 5-year-olds.
And some of the most needy
Yeah.
people in our community come in here, and they are loved on and provided for, and if they want, they get prayed for, and provides community. And
And coffee and cake.
It's coffee and
There's
cake.
a theme here.
Debbie was setting it up, and I went along to the first meeting. I was on maternity leave with Isaac, who was basically newborn, so went along to the first meeting and kind of said, hey, I've got a day off, you know, I can help. The vision sounds great. I can help until my maternity leave finishes, and then that's it, I'm done. I'm going back to work. And so I helped for the first year while kind of Isaac was with me on mat leave, and it was lovely. And then I just really didn't want to give it up when I went back to work. And I went to so Lighthouse is part of a bigger charity called Grow Baby. I went to the Grow Baby conference, and in the worship really felt God saying to me, well, why do you have to give it up? Which prompted a bit of a rethink with us about how many days a week I went back to work, and whether we could make it work. And essentially I dropped a day at work so I could carry on doing Lighthouse. And now, I lead it with Claire D, and it's fab. It's one of the highlights of my week. So essentially we meet here in the Dolphin, all sorts of kind of local families. Sometimes it's chaos, tears, laughter, a cupboard full of kind of clothes and kit and equipment, and kind of provide for people who need it, whatever that looks like on a Thursday morning. And it's just been really lovely. Building the team has been amazing. Seeing what God's doing in the team, I think in particular, as well as visitors.
Yeah, it's been really fun working on Lighthouse. I've really enjoyed it. It's been great to get to know just other people in the community, people that don't come to church but might at some point. Just having some real conversations, I think, with people, and people that you've never met before, just suddenly breaking down, and you feel that you are able to hopefully help them feel a bit encouraged, to be able to practically help them, but also then encourage them with prayer at the end of it. People are very receptive to prayer, I find, which in normal walks of life you wouldn't find that, but they kind of enter into this space and are open to it. And then we can also bless them, hopefully, with practical things. And they return. I think I was surprised at how many women keep coming back. We always say, you know, come back any week, but I think they hopefully feel it's a great space to come, and they feel loved and welcome when they're here. But yeah, I've really enjoyed doing it. It's been really fun.
The Thursday evening, there's usually great stories about how God has worked in that morning, or how God has turned up and blessed you either with buggies when you were running out of buggies, and then someone walks in that morning and you've just been given 5 buggies and they need the perfect buggy you've got just for that person. That happens so often.
It's never quiet, and now Isaac's at school, so I'm actually here on my own rather than with the little ones, but it's lovely. I love it. Highlight of my week. So yeah.
We've had some baptisms. First baptism, the first one I remember doing was at
Elmbrook Chapel,
which isn't there anymore. And at that, remember it because there's a photo that might appear somewhere in this video. We've got Lorraine, who's still with us, Lorraine, on our preaching team.
So I joined the church when I was 17. I think it was like the November time, and then the following year in the May was when we had our first baptism service. And it was over at Elmbrook Chapel, which is no more. It's like some sort of B&Q building or something on the main 817. Anyway, and Jason baptised me, had lots of hair, and Steve Watley as well were the people who baptised me. And it was one of the most special days of my life, like going from not really being a Christian to having a full experience of the Holy Spirit. And I remember coming up out of the water and just knowing that life was going to be different from now on, and having my friends and family there to support me, and what I didn't know then was that it was going to be quite a turbulent few years personally in my family life, and that God was steadfast and faithful through all of that and still is. And from that point, I then went on to go on to Bible college, and my whole life changed direction. And I met Dave, and all sorts of things around that sort of time. So it was incredibly formative. I can't remember what was said. Like, obviously I shared my testimony, but the whole experience of being in the water and coming up out of the water was just, there aren't really any words, to be fair.
Back in the day, Ian and Marianne Strong, Ian was the first person that I knew who had a digital camera, and it was 1.3 megapixels. Now, that meant we could do the baptism, and then on the Sunday, Ian had then printed the photos of the baptism and laminated them, because we didn't have a digital projector back then, and it was up on a display board, and that was like so cutting edge that people could walk into the Sunday service and see photos
It's
of
like
the
Disney
baptism.
World.
I just love the baptisms. They're just so moving to listen to people's testimonies. I just love those services. Absolutely love those services. They're just the best.
I was baptised when I was 17. It was at St. Paul's Church. I don't remember a lot about my testimony, because I remember I got up there, kind of said the bare minimum, cried, and then couldn't get anything else out. But it was really special, because obviously it was Dad that was baptising me, and John Franklin.
I got baptised when I was 17. I think I was 17.
Let's go with that.
And it was at St. Paul's Church in Cheam. We didn't have our own fancy pool then, so we had to go and borrow somebody else's. And that baptism service, I'm pretty sure it was 4 youth that were getting baptised at the same time. I had Anna as my towel holder. And we got to invite all of our friends and family, and people from the church came. I think it was on like a Wednesday evening or something bizarre like that. I don't know why that's bizarre, but it just feels like an odd day for a
Wednesdays are strange.
It just feels like an odd day for a baptism. And I got to invite all my friends from school and things. And I'd only been coming to the church, 2 years at that point, but I was pretty sure. And I'm still here, so it's a good sign.
The baptism worked.
Yeah.
My baptism was rather special. I had not planned any of it, and there was a call forward. Would anyone like to come? And
Can I just interject that Julie was just never going to get baptised, or she would only get baptised like in private. She said,
in a river.
Yeah, it was like, maybe Pete could baptise me in a river or on the beach or something like that. Don't want to do all this up front, loads of people. No, don't want to do that. And
anyway, there was a call to the front. Pete said, would anyone like to be baptised? So it was as if I couldn't stop myself getting up. If somebody had tried to stop me, or somebody had got in front of me, said this before, I would have rugby tackled them to the ground. It was like my time, and I can't explain that. But
it's like a bullet from a gun.
I looked like a plant in the audience, don't I? Because I was so keen. But yeah, I was baptised, and it was wonderful.
I got baptised at Overton Grange on a Sunday morning. It was a really special day. It was a really special day. I had Lily as my towel holder.
Was I?
Yeah.
Oh.
Glad it was memorable for you too. Just because Lily was the one who invited me to know Jesus in the first place, so it felt like a good place to start. It was an amazing day. I was going through a really rough patch personally at the time, and it was one of those days that really stands out as this was a really good day. This was a really good day. It was just so much celebration, having all your church family around you at one point. It was very special. I liked my baptism.
And then we had lots of parties.
And we've always had parties.
There's been some great parties.
Yeah, we can talk about that for quite a long time, actually.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of parties at Sutton Vineyard.
Yeah, we've had a lot of parties over the years.
But I think the first
party we had was actually in the hall, wasn't it? And we had like a big picnic there.
One of our first socials was at Morden Hall Park. We had fireworks.
Oh yeah.
Chant-Mal, yes.
Yeah, it was really fun actually, just being away for the church, like as a church. I mean, it must have been an organisational nightmare.
And they said at the end of it they'd never run out of alcohol.
At Chant-Mal, I think it was, we drank the bar dry, where there was we ran out of alcohol because everybody drank too much, which I'm not endorsing, but you know, it shows the sort of church that we're at, I guess.
The shepherd walked out something like 2 days before we went.
Yeah.
The catering staff of Chant-Mal left.
Yeah.
And the food was just terrible. So we were given sandwiches and things for our meals. And
so all the food that we had for dinner was basically deep fried. And I remember it being great, but I think from an organisational point of view, from the leaders at Sutton Vineyard, it wasn't quite as good as that. But that was like 15 years ago. Wow.
They even had in the early days, which is pretty uncool now, but it was cool then, barn dances.
I hate barn dances.
That was our very first one. Oh no, that was after the fireworks.
You can tell it's the Lord. I hate barn
The Funky Blue Chicken Band. And then we found out that our church really liked to party.
We've had James Bond's parties, we've had balls, we've had was it a 70s party or discos? I just remember everybody, I wasn't actually at that one. Everyone was wearing big hair.
Boogie Nights, I remember. That was one of my favourite parties because we dressed up.
Oh, I remember this story, yeah.
I had a wig, a caftan,
We looked fab.
medallion, false teeth, Austin Powers teeth. And we needed to fill up with petrol. So I decided to stay in full outfit and we filled up in a petrol station with my afro wig on and everything. And went in and paid for the fuel and was asked what we were doing. I said, I'm going to a church party. And it was worth it just to see the look on the cashier's face.
Jason and Bev turned up and they were like 60s hippies and their costume was so brilliant that for the first 10 minutes no one recognised them.
Yeah,
they really look good.
We've had multiple movie parties. I think we had one and then we had another one, so we called it the sequel.
You have to be a film character. And that was just awesome.
We dressed up as the Incredibles for the movie party.
That was good.
And it was such a good, like probably the best costume ever.
Yeah, we dressed up as Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
And we were Sylvester and Tweety Pie.
I dressed up as the girl from Black Swan.
Jack dressed as a ninja.
Dressed up as minions. And
I think Mum was Catwoman.
Jason was Darth Vader.
Because we had a smoke machine and we ended up with lightsaber fight between Darth Vader and Stuart Hardy as Luke Skywalker.
The one that sticks in mind for me was our 18th birthday party 7 years ago, which I was very involved in organising. And it was such a great evening. We had stretch limos turning up with the pastors.
Like a very glam night. We had a magician and the balloon drop, which took forever, and all the voile.
Picnics in the park we love.
Yeah.
We all go to that same spot in Nonsuch. I don't think we've ever not been there. Eat food, play football or cricket or frisbee or all three. All the kids run around having a great time. All the adults run around being big kids.
The 1997 party to commemorate the year that Sutton Vineyard started.
Yeah, we came into Teletubbies, yeah.
The 1997 party, we had the Spice Girls.
Yes.
I think one of the highlights is probably the Spice Girls and Backstreet Boys.
I love the one where we had the Spice Girls and the Backstreet Boys. I thought that was a brilliant party.
How ridiculous was that? In a really brilliant way.
Yes, I do remember very clearly the one in 2017 because I was a Spice Girl and that was the most horrifying experience ever.
I asked multiple people if they would do it. Half of them dropped out. Becky had to be a Backstreet Boy because we ran out of boys.
I can't believe I did it. I think I was the old. They had to get someone old in with all the youngsters.
we went to Faith's house and we were like learning our routine at her house.
Simon Harris had just had an operation and split his stitches doing, it wasn't quite the splits, but I think he was attempting it.
And actually, one of the most entertaining parts of that evening when the Spice Girls were doing their thing, and there was a bit of a dance routine, and Faith actually turned towards the band and did a slut drop.
It was fun. It was kind of good to be part of it.
We need to say kind of embarrassing.
Yeah, also very embarrassing. Yeah.
Anyway, I hope the Spice Girls come back for another party.
Parties are important.
So it's good to have a church that knows how to play well.
We always known how to have fun, and that's really great. And one of the things I think that people have found really attractive about the church.
I think it's part of just doing life with everyone, isn't it? And having that. We've got the community with small group, and then there's the wider church.
Yeah, they're more important than just like, let's get together and like have a fun night. It's actually it's been a real opportunity, and something that Sutton Vineyard are actually very good at. It's kind of allowing people to take those baby steps into church without going to church.
And seeing that we're not all weirdos.
Well, we're weird, but we're a normal kind of weird.
Yeah, like good weird.
Yeah.
How's church changed?
Other than the chocolates you used to get in the service, yeah.
Well, over the years, I've seen obviously increasing size.
The church has expanded hugely.
There was definitely a lot less technology. Like it's definitely we definitely weren't filming the services.
Technology.
Oh yes.
Some of the photos might appear up on the screen of having an OHP.
We've got better at tech. You know, the app, the live streaming, sort of the technology type thing.
I remember when Jason bought his first ever digital camera and it was like 1 megapixel or something, and you look at the pictures now, they're horrific. But it's memories, you know, and that's how we've gone over those years. It just shows how long Sutton Vineyard has been running for, that we've got photos from then, which you can hardly see what's going on because the quality is so poor.
The setup people were, a lot more chaotic. That it wasn't as organised as it is now.
Jason had hair.
Jason had hair. I have proof. So this is a photo. This shows how far we've come.
Well, I found my walk with the Lord at Sutton Vineyard, so that's a huge change for me, and that has all happened here.
There is this larger life of the church carried by people in the church wonderfully, and it feels, even though it's our church, it feels more like our church together.
It's been an absolute joy to belong. It's just such a privilege to be a member of a community like Sutton Vineyard and to belong and to have an opportunity to serve and to be kind of part of the body of Christ, part of Jesus' body coming together in the way that only Christians do, because the way that Jesus has changed things for us in our lives.
Over the past years, I've watched God grow and bless SVC, and it's been a privilege to be able to serve in this wonderful community.
But it doesn't get better than that when the people in your church grow up through the church, have faith, their own faith, and go on to be leaders in the church, in the body of Christ.
Just watch people grow, from children to leaders that are in the church now.
I have seen so many people rise up in the last 6.5 years. I have seen people grow, people know their calling more.
It's just been nice to grow with the church. That's how I feel, that we have grown with
the church, and also made some amazing friends as well, which has been just such a huge part of it as well.
Yeah, relationships.
It's the relationships you make.
You know what church means to me, and that 25 years has shown lots of friendships and people. And people are the most important thing. So I think that's, a really nice thing to look back and reflect on.
We're going through a season at the minute with a lot of new people joining us. It does feel like a replant in some way. And for those people that are joining us, we hope that you consider yourself as part of our ongoing story as a church.
Our ongoing crazy story.
There's not many things that are that consistent for that long. Whereas, so there are people that maybe you don't even know that well, but actually you've known them quite a long time and they've just been part of your life, which is lovely.
And, people are caring and fun and normal,
Lots of things haven't changed, which is maybe what to talk about, our DNA and our values, our vineyard DNA as we call it, the things that we treasure that God's called us to.
I feel it's always been a very community and family centred church, and always been very mission and involved in the community, and and I think that's a sort of theme that's run through it from beginning to end.
The thing that's always stayed the same is the idea that if you go to church, you should get involved in doing something at church. Whether it's helping out with the kids or pushing trolleys or looking friendly at the back in a ridiculous green t-shirt. Like there's always been an expectation that if you're around, you should kind of help out and muck in.
I suppose a lot of people in Sutton would know Sutton Vineyard even if they weren't Christian.
Yeah.
You know, because they've made an impact.
What has stayed the same for me has just been the aspect of fun. We always have fun. We, laugh at each other and ourselves. We grow as a family. We fiercely love and we're incredibly loyal. And I've seen that in our staff team and our wider church the whole time that I have been working at Sutton Vineyard. And that kind of legacy, I think, that Jason and Bev so deeply root into our community's culture will live on in all of us as individuals for a very long time.
Yes, I'd say there's, in a way, more continuities than changes.
Yeah, I'd say a highlight is the stability of it. It's just there. And you know there's a group of people that love you. And if you need help, there's someone there to talk to. That's been, the reliability of that's been a highlight. It's been good.
That, along with our constant commitment to being real and not putting a face on things, not pretending to be something we're not.
We've been here 23
whole length of time. Yeah.
And people tend to be real now as opposed to false. So if you're kind of having a crap day, you don't mind saying it, basically. Yeah.
Being real about the fact that God actually accepts us just as we are. One of the Vineyard motives I love is that God accepts us just as we are. It's just that he doesn't expect us to stay just as we are. And that's been one of my driving forces, I guess, across my time in Sutton Vineyard, to see people achieve their potential.
Jason and Bev have stayed the same. They're still Jason and Bev. You can't have Jason without Bev or Bev without Jason. But I don't think I've ever said Bev and Jason. That doesn't sound right. It's Jason and Bev has always stayed the same.
Bev and Jason's leadership, they have poured their lives into this church. 25 years.
25 years in one position is awesome, but when you're senior pastors of a busy church with your own life going on, that is particularly praiseworthy. So well done, 25 years. Thank you.
They've been so faithful over the years, which is incredible. And we've watched them grow in those years as well. They really have grown.
They were always passionate about the Lord. I would definitely say that they've never lost that passion, which again is actually quite remarkable when you think about it. Because leading a church, let's be honest, it's not a gig everyone would want. And when you're dealing with people, it must be so hard and so frustrating at times. And yet they just persevere and they do it because they love Jesus. And I think that for me has been inspiring.
When we first started the church, we did everything. Okay, that's what church planters do. We literally did the preaching, did the setup, did the worship, did the tea and coffee, kids. That's what church planters do, and had 2 jobs and 2 kids and another one on the way. But that's changed, as it should, and the church has matured and grown. There's a big change. So now, at this point in the life of the church after 25 years, we have not just wonderful staff, but amazing leaders, and volunteers and people that serve in the church. And
I just want to say thank you for all what's been, all that's happened in the past, and for the many blessings we believe is going to come. So thank you, SBC.
Yes, thank you, SBC. I am so grateful to them for all that they have done. And this is like a big adventure with Jesus, isn't it? And I'm looking forward to the next 25 years, although I dare say I may not be there for 25 years. I might be in heaven, I hope.
Things have changed, people have changed, buildings change, but I guess God still remains the same, right? Wherever we go and whatever we do, and as old as we get.
So
the future.
So what's the future of the church? More of what God's established, believing that it's his church, believing that the DNA and the values and the mission, the calling we have is not just something we hold, but the members of our church do. And the wonderful members of our church and leaders will continue to grow in that and multiply that and replicate that and give that away, and that new people will come and take part and find something worth giving their time, energy, and money to. That's a kingdom.
It's an adventure.
Initiative and an adventure. So an adventure, our vision statement is inviting people into their first and next encounter with God. And that's what we're going to continue doing, to have you and your friends and family have the opportunity to have an encounter with God, find out what he's saying to them and say yes to them. So that's the next 25 years.
There's nothing better.
There you go.